The wind howled through the Appalachian pines, sharp and cold, like it was trying to warn me about something I couldn't yet see. I stood by the campfire, its crackling flames the only thing keeping the October chill at bay, and felt the weight of Ethan's gaze on me. I didn't look back, not yet, but I knew he was there, just outside the firelight, watching me like he'd been watching me all day. What does it mean when someone's stare feels like it's peeling back your skin? Not in a cruel way, but like they're searching for something you've hidden even from yourself. That's what Ethan's eyes did to me, and it was why I kept my own fixed on the fire, pretending to adjust the logs. We were strangers, really, thrown together by a college hiking club's impulsive weekend trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was Marcus, the quiet transfer student from Atlanta, still finding my footing at UNC. Ethan was the golden boy from Raleigh, blonde, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who could charm a room without trying. We'd barely spoken before this trip, but when the group decided to pair up for tents, he'd volunteered to share with me. No explanation, just a quick nod and a smile that felt too private for a public moment. Why does a simple choice like that feel like it's rewriting your entire story? I'd shrugged it off, figuring it was just practicality, fewer tents to carry, right? But now, as the firelight danced and the rest of the group chattered around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's decision wasn't random. "Marcus, you good?" His voice cut through the night, low and steady, like he was testing the waters. I turned, and there he was, closer than I'd expected, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows despite the cold. His eyes caught the fire's glow, and for a second, I forgot how to answer. "Yeah, just keeping warm," I mumbled, shoving my hands into my jacket pockets. Why did my voice sound like it was betraying me? I wasn't used to this, feeling unsteady, like the ground beneath me was shifting. He stepped closer, and I noticed the way his jaw tightened, like he was holding something back. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said, not accusing, just curious. "Makes me wonder what's going on in there." He tapped his temple lightly, his lips curving into a half smile. "What do you say when someone sees through your silence?" I shrugged again, my go-to defense. "Not much to say, just here for the hike." He didn't buy it. I could tell by the way his smile faded, replaced by something softer, more searching. "I don't think that's true," he said quietly. "You've got a whole world in there, Marcus. I can see it." My chest tightened. Nobody had ever said something like that to me. Not my parents, not my friends back home. Nobody. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was wrong, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I looked away, back to the fire, because it was safer than meeting his eyes. The group leader, Sarah, clapped her hands, breaking the moment. "All right, y'all, let's pack it in. Big hike tomorrow, and the trail waits for no one." Laughter rippled through the group as people started dousing their campfires and heading to their tents. Ethan and I were the last to move, the fire between us dying down to embers. "You ready?" he asked, jerking his head toward our tent. His voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent to it, something that made my pulse kick up a notch. What does it mean when a simple question feels like a challenge? I nodded, grabbing my backpack, and followed him to the tent. It was small, barely enough room for 2 sleeping bags side by side, and as we crawled inside, the space felt even smaller. The air was thick with the scent of pine and canvas, and I could hear Ethan's breathing, steady and close. We settled in, zipping up our sleeping bags, the lantern casting a soft glow over us. I lay on my back, staring at the tent ceiling, trying to focus on the sounds of the forest outside, crickets, wind, the occasional hoot of an owl. Anything to keep my mind off the fact that Ethan was inches away, his presence filling the tiny space like it was a stadium. Why does silence feel so loud when you're sharing it with someone else? I could feel him shifting, the rustle of his sleeping bag unnaturally loud in the quiet. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke. "Marcus, you ever feel like you're running from something, but you don't know what it is?" His voice was barely above a whisper, like he was afraid the words might break something. I turned my head, just enough to see his outline in the dim light. He was propped up on one elbow, looking at me, his face half-shadowed. What do you say when someone asks a question that feels like it's aimed at your soul? Sometimes, I admitted, my voice rough. You? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted again, and I felt the weight of his gaze, heavier than before. All the time, he said finally, like I'm chasing something I can't name. Or maybe it's chasing me. My heart thudded against my ribs. I wanted to ask what he meant, to dig deeper, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just lay there, letting his confession hang in the air between us. What happens when you realize the person next to you might be carrying the same questions you are? I didn't know yet, but as the lantern flickered and Ethan's breathing slowed, I felt something shift inside me, a crack in the walls I'd built around myself, letting in a sliver of something new, something dangerous. The morning sun filtered through the tent's thin walls, painting stripes of light across Ethan's sleeping bag. I woke first, my body stiff from the cold ground, but my mind was already racing. His words from last night echoed in my head, like I'm chasing something I can't name. What did he mean, and why did it feel like he was talking about me? What does it mean when someone's confession feels like a mirror? I sat up quietly, careful not to wake him, and studied his face in the soft light. His blonde hair was mussed, one arm flung out of his sleeping bag, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. He looked peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a storm beneath that calm. I slipped out of the tent, needing air, needing space to think. The campsite was stirring, with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the group's makeshift kitchen. Sarah waved me over, but I shook my head, grabbing a water bottle and heading toward the trailhead. I needed to walk, to clear my head before the group hike started. Why does being alone feel like the only way to understand yourself sometimes? The trail was quiet, the early morning mist clinging to the trees like a shroud. I walked until I found a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley, the mountains stretching out in shades of blue and gray. I sat, letting the silence settle over me, but Ethan's words kept creeping back. Chasing something I can't name. Was I doing the same thing? I'd spent my whole life keeping people at arm's length. Growing up in Atlanta, I'd learned early that being different, being quieter, softer, less like the other boys, came with a price. The snickers, the sideways glances, the whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd built walls to keep it all out, but Ethan's presence was like a chisel, chipping away at them without even trying. Footsteps crunched behind me, and I turned to see him approaching, his flannel shirt untucked, his eyes bright despite the early hour. "Figured you'd be out here," he said, sitting beside me without asking. "You're not much for crowds, huh? What do you say when someone sees your habits before you've even named them?" "Just needed some air," I said, keeping my eyes on the valley below. "You didn't have to follow me." "Maybe I wanted to," he replied, his voice light but edged with something heavier. He leaned back on his hands, his shoulder brushing mine, and I froze. It was just a touch, accidental, but it sent a jolt through me, like static electricity. Why does a single moment of contact feel like it could unravel everything? I shifted away, just an inch, but he noticed. His smile faltered, and for a second, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled a small sketchbook from his pocket and started drawing, his pencil moving in quick, sure strokes. "You draw?" I asked, surprised. It was the first real question I'd asked him, and it felt like a risk. "Yeah," he said, not looking up. "Helps me think. You want to see?" He tilted the sketchbook toward me, and I saw a rough outline of the valley, the mountains captured in sharp, confident lines. But what caught my eye was a figure in the foreground, a guy with dark hair, sitting on a rock, staring out at the world. It was me. My breath caught. "That's me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "Couldn't help it. You look like you were carrying something heavy out here. Wanted to capture it. What does it mean when someone sees you so clearly it hurts?" I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at the sketch, my heart pounding. The rest of the group called out from the trailhead, signaling the start of the hike, and Ethan closed the sketchbook, standing up. "Come on," he said, offering me a hand. "We've got a mountain to climb." I took his hand, just for a second, and the warmth of his grip lingered long after I let go. As we joined the group, I couldn't shake the feeling that this hike, this moment, was about to change everything. The trail was brutal, winding up steep inclines and through dense forest, but Ethan stayed close, matching my pace. We didn't talk much, but every now and then, he'd point out a view or crack a joke, and I'd laugh despite myself. His presence was steady, grounding, and it made me question why I'd spent so long avoiding connection. Why do some people feel like home, even when you barely know them? By midday, we reached a clearing with a view that stole my breath. Mountains rolling out like waves, the sky so clear it felt like you could fall into it. The group stopped for lunch, but Ethan tugged at my sleeve, nodding toward a quieter spot away from the others. "Let's eat here," he said, spreading out a blanket. I hesitated, but something in his eyes, open, unguarded, made me follow. We sat, sharing granola bars and water, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe around him. "Tell me something about you," he said suddenly, leaning back on his elbows. "Something nobody else knows. What do you share when you've spent your life guarding your secrets?" I thought about brushing it off, but his gaze was steady, waiting. "I used to write poetry," I admitted, my cheeks burning. "Back in high school. Haven't done it in years." His eyes lit up. "Poetry, huh? That's cool. What kind?" "The kind that's bad," I said, laughing to cover my embarrassment. "Just feelings, I guess. Stuff I couldn't say out loud." He nodded, like he understood. "You should write again. Bet you've got a lot to say now. What does it mean when someone believes in a part of you you've buried?" I didn't answer, but his words stayed with me, stirring something I thought I'd locked away. The hike back to camp was quieter, the group tired but buzzing with the high of the day's views. Ethan and I walked side by side, our steps falling into an easy rhythm. Every so often, our arms brushed, and I told myself it was just the narrow trail, but my skin prickled each time. Why does a fleeting touch feel like it's rewriting your pulse? I kept my eyes on the path, afraid to look at him, afraid of what I'd see, or what he'd see in me. By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dinner was a chaotic affair, with the group huddled around the fire, passing around hot dogs and stories. Ethan sat across from me, laughing at someone's joke, but his eyes kept finding mine. Each glance felt like a question, one I wasn't ready to answer. "What do you do when you're scared of what you're feeling?" I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion, and headed to the tent. The truth was, I needed space, not from Ethan, but from the way he made me feel. Like I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, and one step could change everything. I was already in my sleeping bag when he crawled in, the lantern casting long shadows across his face. He didn't say anything at first, just settled in, his movements careful, like he was trying not to disturb the air between us. But the silence was heavy, charged, and I knew he felt it too. "You okay?" he asked finally, his voice soft but piercing. He was lying on his side, facing me, his head propped on one hand. "Yeah," I lied, staring at the tent ceiling. "Just tired." He didn't push, but I could feel his eyes on me, steady and patient. "You don't have to talk," he said, "but I'm here if you want to." What does it mean when someone offers you a safe place to fall? My throat tightened, and I turned my head to look at him. His face was closer than I expected, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. For a moment, I thought he might say something else, but instead, he reached out under the blanket, his hand finding mine. My breath stopped. His fingers were warm, calloused, and they curled around mine with a gentleness that felt like a confession. He didn't say a word, didn't move, just held my hand, his thumb brushing lightly against my knuckles. Why does a single touch feel like it could break you open? I didn't pull away, but I didn't move closer either. I just lay there, my heart hammering, every nerve in my body alive with the weight of his hand in mine. It wasn't just a touch, it was a question, a door opening, and I didn't know if I was ready to walk through it. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer right away. His thumb stopped moving, but his grip stayed firm. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice raw. "But I know I don't want to stop." My mind spun. I'd spent so long hiding, keeping my feelings locked away, but here was Ethan, unafraid, laying his truth bare. "What do you do when someone's courage makes you question your own?" I squeezed his hand, just slightly, and it felt like a promise. To him, to myself, to whatever this was. We didn't say anything else. He didn't let go, and neither did I. The lantern flickered out, plunging us into darkness, but his hand stayed in mine, anchoring me through the night. The next morning, I woke to find his sleeping bag empty. Panic flared in my chest. Had I imagined it? But then I saw him outside, stoking the fire, his back to me. I crawled out of the tent, my heart still racing from the night before. What does it mean when a moment changes the way you see someone? I watched him, the way he moved with quiet confidence, and realized I didn't just see Ethan anymore. I saw the possibility of something more, something terrifying and beautiful. "Morning," he said, glancing up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You?" He shrugged, poking at the fire. "Had a lot on my mind." His eyes met mine, and there it was again, that unspoken question hanging between us. The group started packing up, preparing for the final day of the trip, but I barely noticed. My world had narrowed to Ethan, to the memory of his hand in mine, to the way he was looking at me now, like he was waiting for me to decide what came next. What do you do when you're standing at a crossroads, and both paths scare you? I didn't know yet, but as we broke down the tent together, our hands brushing as we folded the canvas, I felt the weight of that question pressing down on me, demanding an answer. The final day's hike was shorter, but the air felt heavier, charged with everything left unsaid. Ethan and I walked near the back of the group, our steps quieter than the day before. Every glance, every accidental brush of our shoulders, felt like a conversation we weren't ready to have out loud. Why does silence carry so much weight when it's shared? I kept replaying the moment in the tent, his hand in mine, the way his thumb had traced circles on my skin. It wasn't just a touch, it was a confession, a risk, and I hadn't stopped thinking about it since. We stopped at a stream for a break, the group spreading out to refill water bottles and take photos. Ethan sat on a flat rock, sketching again, his pencil moving with that same quiet intensity. I watched him from a distance, trying to make sense of the ache in my chest. What does it mean when you're drawn to someone in a way that scares you? I'd never felt this before, not with anyone. Growing up, I'd kept my feelings locked away, convinced they were something to be ashamed of. But Ethan was different. He wasn't hiding, and that made me question everything I'd told myself about who I was supposed to be. "You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna sit?" he called out, not looking up from his sketchbook. His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing me. I walked over and sat beside him, the rock cold beneath me. "What are you drawing now?" I asked, leaning closer to see. It was the stream, the water catching the sunlight in quick, sharp strokes. But there was a figure again, me, sitting by the water, my face turned slightly away, lost in thought. "You've got a thing for drawing me, huh?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it was softer this time, almost shy. "You're interesting to draw. There's something about you, like you're holding a story nobody's heard yet. What do you say when someone sees the parts of you you've tried to hide?" My throat tightened, and I looked away, focusing on the stream. "You don't even know me," I said quietly. "I want to," he replied, his voice so earnest it made my chest hurt. "If you'll let me." I didn't know how to respond. The words were there, tangled up inside me, but saying them felt like stepping off a cliff. Instead, I nodded, just once, and he seemed to understand. He closed his sketchbook and stood, offering me a hand again. This time, I took it without hesitation, and the warmth of his grip felt like a promise. The hike back to camp was uneventful, but the tension between us grew with every step. By the time we reached the campsite, the group was packing up, ready to head back to campus. Ethan and I worked in silence, breaking down the tent, our movements careful but charged. Every time our hands brushed, I felt that same jolt, like a spark that could ignite something bigger. What happens when you're running out of time to face what you're feeling? As we loaded the group's van, I caught Ethan watching me again, his eyes searching, waiting. I wanted to say something, to acknowledge what had happened in the tent, but the words wouldn't come. The drive back to UNC was loud, the group singing along to a playlist of pop hits, but Ethan and I were quiet, sitting in the back row. He sketched in his book, and I stared out the window, watching the mountains fade into the distance. My mind was a mess of questions about him, about me, about what came next. Why does the end of a trip feel like the end of a chance? When we pulled into the campus parking lot, the group spilled out, laughing and making plans for the next adventure. Ethan lingered by the van, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes on me. "You heading home?" he asked, his voice casual, but his gaze anything but. "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding. "You?" He nodded, then hesitated, like he was weighing his words. "Can I walk you back? Just to talk." What do you do when someone's asking for a piece of you you're not sure you're ready to give? I nodded, and we started walking across campus, the evening air cool against my skin. The silence between us was comfortable now, but it was still heavy with everything we hadn't said. When we reached my dorm, he stopped, turning to face me. "Marcus," he said, his voice low, "last night I didn't mean to push you. But I meant it. All of it." My breath caught. I wanted to tell him I felt it too, that his touch had cracked something open inside me, but fear held me back. Instead, I said, "I know. I just need time." He nodded, his eyes soft but steady. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and then he smiled, that same private smile from the first day. "See you around, Marcus." As he walked away, I stood there, my heart racing, wondering if I'd just let something slip through my fingers, or if I'd just found the courage to start chasing it. The next week was a blur of classes and assignments, but Ethan was everywhere, in my thoughts, in the sketches I found myself doodling during lectures, in the quiet moments when I couldn't stop replaying that night in the tent. I'd see him across the quad sometimes, laughing with friends, and my stomach would twist with a mix of longing and fear. Why does wanting something feel so much like losing it? I avoided the hiking club's next meeting, telling myself I was busy, but the truth was, I was scared. Scared of what Ethan made me feel, scared of what it meant to let someone in. But fate, or maybe just a small campus, had other plans. I ran into him at the library, both of us reaching for the same book on Appalachian trails. Our hands brushed, and that spark was back, sharper than ever. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, his smile warm but cautious, like he was giving me space to run if I wanted to. "What do you do when running isn't an option anymore?" "Yeah, small world," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You stalking me now?" He laughed, and the sound loosened something in my chest. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just hard to avoid." We ended up at a coffee shop nearby, talking over lukewarm lattes. He told me about growing up in Raleigh, about his mom's garden and his dad's old jazz records. I told him about Atlanta, about the poetry I used to write, about the way I'd always felt like I was on the outside looking in. Why does sharing your story feel like giving someone a map to your heart? He listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving mine. And when I stopped talking, he leaned forward, his voice low. "You're not on the outside with me, Marcus. Not if you don't want to be." My heart stuttered. I wanted to believe him, but years of hiding made it hard. "It's not that simple," I said, staring into my coffee. "I've spent so long keeping this part of me locked away." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine, but not touching. "I get it," he said. "I've been there. But you don't have to do it alone." What does it mean when someone offers to walk through your fear with you? I didn't have an answer, but I felt something shift inside me, like a door creaking open. We talked until the coffee shop closed, and when we stepped outside, the night air was crisp, the stars bright overhead. "Walk with me," he asked, and I nodded, falling into step beside him. We wandered through campus, passing empty lecture halls and glowing dorm windows, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. When we reached my dorm again, he stopped, his hands in his pockets. "I meant what I said, Marcus," he said quietly. "I'm here, whenever you're ready." I wanted to say I was ready, to close the distance between us, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, and he smiled, like he understood. As he walked away, I felt the weight of that moment in the tent again, his hand in mine, the quiet promise of something more. The next day, I found a note slipped under my door. It was a sketch. Me, sitting in the coffee shop, my face lit with a mix of hope and hesitation. Below it, in Ethan's neat handwriting, were the words, "Keep writing your story. I want to read it." What do you do when someone sees your truth and asks to be part of it? I tucked the sketch into my notebook, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I felt like I might be ready to find out. I started writing again. Not poetry, not yet, but journal entries, fragments of thoughts I'd kept buried for years. Every word felt like a step toward something, toward Ethan, toward myself. I saw him in classes, at the dining hall, and each time, his smile was a reminder of the door he'd opened. Why does courage feel so much like vulnerability? I wanted to tell him everything, about the fear that had kept me silent, about the hope he'd sparked, but I didn't know how. Instead, I invited him to a poetry reading at a local bookstore, a small step towards sharing the part of me I'd hidden for so long. He showed up, his flannel swapped for a dark sweater, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. "Didn't know you were into this stuff," he said, his eyes bright with curiosity. "I'm trying to be," I admitted, and he grinned, like he knew how much that cost me. The reading was small, just a handful of students and locals sharing their work. I didn't read, but I listened, and Ethan's presence beside me made every word feel more alive. Afterward, we walked through downtown Chapel Hill, the streets quiet, the air cool. "You ever think about reading your stuff?" he asked, his hands in his pockets. "What do you say when someone believes in a dream you've barely dared to dream?" "Maybe," I said, "if I ever write something worth sharing. It'll be worth it," he said, his voice certain. "You've got a voice, Marcus. People need to hear it." We stopped at a park, sitting on a bench under a streetlight. The silence was comfortable now, but it was still heavy with possibility. I looked at him, at the way the light caught his face, and felt that ache again, the one that had started in the tent and hadn't let go. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" He turned to me, his eyes steady. "Because you're you," he said simply. "Because you're real, and you don't even know how rare that is. What does it mean when someone sees you as enough, just as you are?" My heart pounded, and before I could stop myself, I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing against his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he laced his fingers through mine, his grip warm and sure. We sat there, hands clasped, the world fading around us. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt seen, and it was terrifying and beautiful all at once. The weeks that followed were a blur of moments. Coffee dates, late-night talks, walks across campus with our hands brushing but not quite touching. Ethan was patient, never pushing, but his presence was a constant invitation to be myself. And slowly, I started to accept it. What happens when you start to believe you're worthy of love? I wrote more, sharing bits of my journal with him, and he shared his sketches, each one a window into how he saw the world and me. We were building something, piece by piece, and it felt like a miracle. But miracles are fragile, and I knew it. The world wasn't always kind to people like us, and the fear of what others might think lingered in the back of my mind. I saw it in Ethan too, in the way his smile tightened when we passed certain people on campus, in the way he'd lower his voice when we talked about us. Why does love come with a shadow? I didn't have an answer, but as we sat together one night, sharing a blanket under the stars, I knew I was ready to face it, with him. Winter came early to Chapel Hill, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Ethan and I were inseparable now, our lives tangled in ways I hadn't thought possible. We studied together, ate together, shared quiet moments that felt like they could last forever, but the world outside our bubble was still there, waiting. Why does the world feel so big when you're trying to carve out a space for yourself? I felt it most at a campus party, one we'd been invited to by a mutual friend. The room was loud, crowded, and I stuck close to Ethan, my nerves on edge. We weren't out, not officially, but the way we moved together, his hand brushing my back, my laugh leaning into his, felt like a statement. Someone noticed. A guy from the hiking club, someone I barely knew, made a comment under his breath, loud enough for us to hear. "Didn't know you two were that close," he said, his tone sharp with mockery. What do you do when the world tries to shrink you? I froze, my face burning, but Ethan didn't flinch. He stepped closer to me, his shoulder against mine, and said, "Yeah, we are. Got a problem with that." The guy backed off, muttering something, but the moment stayed with me. Ethan's hand found mine under the table, and he squeezed, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere. That night, we walked back to my dorm, the campus quiet under a blanket of frost. "You didn't have to do that," I said, my voice low. "Call him out like that." "I wanted to," Ethan said, stopping to face me. "I'm not ashamed of you, Marcus. I'm not ashamed of us." My heart swelled, but the fear was still there, gnawing at me. "What if it gets worse?" I asked. "What if people don't accept it?" He took my hands, his eyes fierce. "Then we face it together. I'm not running, and I don't want you to either." What does it mean to choose love over fear? I didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, I chose him. I leaned in, closing the distance between us, and kissed him under the streetlight, the cold air sharp against my skin, but his warmth grounding me. The kiss was soft at first, then deeper, a promise sealed in the quiet of the night. When we pulled back, his eyes were bright, his smile wide. "Took you long enough," he teased, and I laughed, the sound freer than I'd ever heard it. The months that followed weren't easy. There were whispers, looks, moments when the world felt too heavy. But there were also moments of joy. Ethan's sketches filling my room, my poetry finding its way back to me, our hands clasped as we walked through campus, unafraid. Why does love feel like a revolution? Because it is. It's a rebellion against fear, against silence, against a world that tells you who you're supposed to be. Ethan and I were writing our own story, one moment at a time, and it was ours. One night, as we lay under a blanket in his dorm, his arms around me, I thought back to that night in the tent. The moment he'd taken my hand, the moment everything had changed. What he'd done under the blanket hadn't just made me question everything. It had given me the courage to find my answers. And as I looked at him, his face soft in the moonlight, I knew I'd found something worth fighting for. Not just him, but me. The me I'd been afraid to be, the me he'd seen all along.